switch. It's all inside my inner thoughts. That vicious voice I like to tame and put down to rest. Why do we live?